All right, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our fourth town hall in association with Ohio's Future Foundation and our chairman, Jim Renacci. We welcome you to the Zoom town hall discussing corruption in Ohio and the pay-to-play system. Uh, to get things rolling tonight, we're just going to turn it right over to former Congressman Jim Renacci.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being on. This, as Thomas said, is our fourth town hall during the coronavirus pandemic. I know it's been tough for people to get out and get into town hall meetings, but we have been able to do this on about a bi-weekly basis. So any of the new people that have joined today, we welcome you. Some people who may have joined from past town halls, thanks again for coming on board tonight. Look, over the last three, we've talked about Ohio. We've talked about the problems that Ohio is facing. We've talked about the numbers, how Ohio spends too much. If you look at its spending, uh, how it ranks with other states. We've talked about how it taxes too much, how it compares to other states. And we've talked about how people are leaving. Ohio is losing population. And we're going to see that even this year when we lose potentially another congressman. Our population compared to other states continues to decline in the sense that we are not keeping up with the growth of other states. And that's why, even though many years ago we had 23 to 25 members of Congress, today we have 16 and probably going to 15. What I want to talk to you first is for those that don't know who I am. You know, my name's Jim Renacci. I've been in Ohio for almost 40 years now. Um, Started here with just a few $100s. Started my own business back at the age of 23. Created over 1,500 jobs, employed over 3,000 people over the span of 30 years. Went from one business to 60 businesses over that time as well. I grew up in a blue collar union family in Western Pennsylvania, moved here because Ohio was the land of opportunity. Remember, I say was, because today people are leaving Ohio and going to other states and calling them the land of opportunity. My wife, Tina, and I have been married for 37 years. I met her in high school, so she is and I took her to the prom, one of the first dates in high school when it came to the prom. Um, Look, entrepreneurship, growing businesses can only happen in this country. And it can really happen when a state gives you the opportunity like Ohio gave me 37, 38 years ago. And that's the problem. We have a lot of issues in Ohio. One of the reasons for those that say, well, if you were in business, I know you were a US congressman. I was a US congressman because in 2008, if you remember, the Obama administration took over General Motors. I did have one of my businesses was a General Motors Chevy dealership. I was told that my dealership was doing just fine. We had 50 some employees. Life was good. We continued to move the business forward. Not only move it forward, we were going to put it out on the highway. I got an option on some land, was going to move the business out there. And then lo and behold, the Obama administration actually picked winners and losers, actually decided what businesses were essential and not essential. Kind of sounds familiar in Ohio. And then actually determined that my Chevy business was not essential anymore. Now, essential, when does a government have the right to say who's essential? When does the government have the right to pick winners and losers? When does the government have the right to really infringe on our rights as business owners? I was not happy, and I called my US congressman at the time, asking for some help. Learned very quickly that politicians only worry about the next election. They don't really worry about their constituents in many ways. And that's what happened in this situation. That member of Congress voted against the reinstatement of my dealership, and I decided to run against him. And I'm proud to say that I stepped into the game because something was taken away from me. And I believe those are the reasons in many cases we should get involved when we see something like this occurring. Look, while I was in Congress, I earned a reputation of really being a principled conservative and really effective legislator when it came to business. I realized that it's a necessity in many cases for business people and people who have lived in what I call the real world to get involved in politics. And that's what I did. I was a member of the Ways and Means Committee, the Financial Services Committee, but I can tell you, even after being appointed to the powerful Ways and Means Committee and Budget Committee, I realized that Washington was so broken that the only way to fix Washington was to leave and come back to Ohio and prepare Ohio for what's probably coming down the road. Look, we are spending way too much money in Washington, or we're running up our debts, we're running up our liabilities, we're running up our deficits. And in the end, because even today, Ohio takes about 25% of federal funding to balance its budgets. It's even greater today because of the coronavirus. Just think about what happens one day when the federal government says no more. We can't give Ohio any more money. Just think of the collapse that'll occur if we don't get our house in order. And those are the kind of things that I believe we need to start looking at in Ohio. Now, again, we've talked about several problems in our past town halls. Tonight, we're going to focus on corruption. Look, I ran for governor in 2017. I said in 2017 that we had to stop pay for play. I said that Ohio was a pay for play state. Wouldn't you know, 3 years later, we have grown more and more corrupt. Today, Ohio in early 2019 and 2020, in January of 2020, actually, a report came out saying that Ohio, University of Illinois in Chicago, said that Ohio is the 7th most corrupt state in the country. Now, people would say, well, how does corruption affect a state? University of Akron did a report that I'm going to reference a few times. The report basically was put out in November. It says Ohio is falling behind. How Ohio continues to lose its place in the US economy. But one of the paragraphs talks about corruption. And I'm going to just read from it. It says, however, Ohio still has higher than average corruption levels. Using recent data to compare public corruption convictions per 100,000 residents suggests that Ohio is the 7th most corrupt state in the nation. Here's what's interesting. Every one standard deviation increase in public corruption convictions per capita reduces growth in real gross state product per worker by about 2/3 of a standard deviation, meaning that corruption is not just a moral and social problem, but it's also an economic one. Now, that's from the University of Akron Ball State study, which tells us that even if corruption, we say, well, how does it affect our state? Well, this is how it affects our state. It affects our state in an economic sense as well. It's one of the reasons and one of the drivers of why our state is falling behind. Let's talk about some of the corruption issues just over the last year. First one, and this is just recent for those that are not aware, Kenneth Johnson, a Democrat. And by the way, corruption goes across both parties. It's just not Republicans and it's just not Democrats. It's actually both. Kenneth Johnson was just indicted under 15 related charges took over 127,200 in reimbursement for services never rendered. For bribes, he's got 15 corruption-related charges. And again, these individuals are accused of developing and implementing schemes to defraud hardworking American federal taxpayers, which is what FBI agent Eric B. Smith said in a News Channel 5 report. Citizens should have confidence in their elected representatives being ethical and law-abiding, not enriching themselves through graft and deceit. The FBI will continue to root out fraud and portray themselves as civil servants and hold them accountable. This is just the most recent. This just happened in the last couple of weeks. Let's go to another set of fraud in our state. Again, this is Republicans and Democrats. Republicans and Democrats in Cincinnati, council members took bribes for votes, promising jobs and contracts for downtown potentially development projects. Money for action related to projects. Again, out of the New York Times, the citizens of Cincinnati have to be running right now. How can they trust be restored when 1/3 of city council has been arrested this year for bribery and extortion and honest service cases? Chris Hoffman, the special agent in charge of the FBI Cincinnati field office, said at a news conference on, well, this was Thursday, a few months back. Again, this is corruption even at the local level. This is corruption that occurs after being named the 7th most corrupt state in the country. This is legislators being corrupt and taking money, taking bribes, and not really working for the will of the people. There's another case, which we don't have a slide for, and it's before this one, before we get onto this slide. This deals with 4 Toledo City Council members, 4 Democrat City Council members accepting payments of up to $5,000 each for yes votes on internet cafes and convenience store approvals. Think about that. Even on the local level, this is money being paid for votes. Money being paid for votes. Now, we're going to talk about this next one, which is one of the largest cases to hit Ohio. This was also last year, and this was when the grand jury, when there were several indictments of officials in the state of Ohio regarding an entity called Generation Now, which was really created and purported as a social welfare organization. According to plea agreements, the actual purpose of Generation Now was to be used for means to receive undisclosed donations as a benefit to elected officials. What we saw here was $60 million, which was used to not only get individuals elected, but to also get individuals to support and be willing to vote for House Bill 6. Now, there's going to be a lot more coming out of this. And, you know, there are a number of people that were indicted. But in the end, there's a trail of money. There's a trail of issues. And clearly, there's a trail of problems in Ohio when we have statewide and state House members, state Senate members who are all involved, Democrats and Republicans, by the way. This doesn't, this also crosses party lines, but we have issues when our state has these kind of problems. Now, before we even move to the next slide, think about it. I have not even talked about 4 years back when we had the indictment of the Speaker of the House, who was removed um, 4 years ago as well. So if you start to see what's going on, you can see that Ohio is clearly a pay-for-play state. Money brings in votes, money brings in positions, money is used to get people elected. Once it's used to get people elected, people get contracts. There are serious problems in Ohio. And we're just touching on the ones that we found. So think about it. How many contracts out there were given out to people who donated to state officials? Now, look, we do have an auditor of state, and each auditor of state is supposed to watch and look at these things. Um, and hopefully they're going to continue to do the best job they can. This is not a slam on the auditor. This is really a slam on those individuals who, where we realize, are using their government positions to not only benefit others, but to get votes and to get campaign donations. There's some other notable cases over the years that have been brought to the forefront when it came to pay for play. This one was just brought up most recently. The governor, the attorney general, and more than 321,000 in dark money are being parlayed in a bid to elect Mike DeWine's daughter, a Greene County prosecutor, which was the now governor's first elected office. Unusual appearance in a small county race. A mysterious federal super PAC is backing the campaign of the governor's daughter with cash from a Columbus social welfare non-for-profit not required to disclose its donors. Again, when did you ever see $321,000 going in to try and help through a non-for-profit which doesn't disclose its donors, going in to support a local county prosecutor's race? Again, these are the kind of things that are problematic and need to be continued to look at. Now, whether anything was done wrong or illegal, we're not saying that. But here's what we are saying. Money is rolling in from outside sources to elect people. In this case, by the way, for those that aren't aware, Governor DeWine's daughter lost that race, even though she outspent her opponent probably 4 or 5 to 1. But again, where is the money coming from? How is it rolling in? Why is someone willing to put up $321,000 in a county prosecutor's race? These are the questions that need to be answered. Next slide. Interesting enough, this goes back a few years ago, but it talks about both a Republican and a Democrat, both using their position as the Attorney General. You know, Attorney General DeWine and Attorney General Cordray both use the office to not only parlay campaign dollars, but really campaign contributions and revenue received by law firms doing collection work for the Attorney General's office. Again, it's an amazing thing if you take a look at it. This has been going on for years on both sides, Republicans and Democrats. It's amazing if you look at some of the numbers. Firms in the top quarter of contributors during DeWine's tenure averaged 425% more revenue than those in the bottom quarter. During Cordray's term, the top quarter of contributors earned 156% more on average than the bottom quarter of contributors. Again, legal firms want collection work, they donate, and then whatever the process is, they end up getting the contracts. Not saying anything's illegal here, but clearly saying we actually have a problem when this type of system can be used to continue to corrupt the system and make campaign contributions the most important thing to getting contracts. Now, again, I think what you would find is both attorney generals in this case would say, we had a process, we picked and choose, you know, lots of things, but it's very interesting. You're going to see, you can see where firms actually contributed to county parties a set amount of money that was then contributed, the exact same amount was contributed to the campaigns of these individuals. So you can see the movement of money, and then you could see the firms getting contracts. Again, doesn't mean the money was used to get the contracts, but it sure has a little bit of a taint to it. And that's why we have to look at it and figure out ways. Doesn't mean it was illegal. It sure does seem to be improper. And I think those are the kind of things we need to be talking about. It's easy to talk about the problems. I want to also bring up the solutions because, you know, a lot of people always say, Renacci, you know, what are the solutions? Well, here's the simplest solution. Look, when I was in business and I was in the nursing home business, again, I told you I was in multiple businesses. Nursing home business, when you filed a report at the end of the year, you had to disclose anybody that owned 5% or more of that company. And the reason was people wanted to make sure there was no issue with pay for play within the nursing home industry, especially when the nursing home industry, you're collecting Medicaid dollars and Medicare dollars. So it was pretty simple. Every time I filed a report that on a facility that I owned, I had to disclose that I owned more than 5%. I also had a CPA firm that did many, many cost reports and many, many reports. And we also had to disclose multiple organizations. And by the way, it's not only if you owned it directly, it was directly or indirectly. Because many people say, well, you know, all you have to do is you own a company who owns a company who owns a company who owns a company. And then no one would ever have to disclose it. Now, if you have more than a 5% interest in that company, I don't care if you're 3, 4, 5, or 6 entities out, you had to disclose it. So how do we fix something like this? Think about that. First off, if you're a company and you disclose that you own more than 5%, then we need to set a limit. Now I put $5,000 in there, but think about this. If you're a company doing business with the state of Ohio, you should disclose whether any employee or owner donated more than $5,000 to anyone in government directly or indirectly. Wouldn't that be an easy answer? Because right away, if you had to disclose that directly or indirectly, and then you said that anybody who contributes more than 5,000 directly or indirectly cannot have a government contract, cannot have a government appointment. Let's talk about appointments. Pretty interesting. This is another pay for play, which is kind of what I call the shadow pay for play. So let's assume you support a candidate. And let's also assume that because you support that candidate, and I'm just going to use a member of the House. Let's assume that the member of the House supports a candidate for elected official, statewide elected official. A member of the House, State House, makes, we'll say, $60,000 a year. Let's say they're around for 20 years. Believe it or not, even though we have term limits, we have people around 20 or 30 years. They get a pension based on the 3 highest paid years in state government. A lot of people aren't aware of that. The 3 highest paid years. Now, there's been some changes to that. Now it's the 5 highest paid years, but a lot of people were grandfathered in on the 3 highest paid years. So if you support a candidate and you support them enough that that candidate then appoints you to a position, either as a director of, well, look, one of the best examples is today, the director of, let's see, the director of higher education makes, I think it's 160 or 180,000 a year. So that director, who may have been in the state making 50 or 60,000 a year for the last 10 or 15 years, now because of their ability to support maybe one of these statewide candidates, gets appointed to a position making 160, 180,000 a year. By the way, there's all kind of directors. I just used one as an example, but there's all kind of directors. If those directors now spend 4 years, 6 years, 5 years, whatever the number is, making 160, 180, 150, the taxpayers have now increased their liability to them, because even though they might be in the state house or the state senate for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, making an average salary of 60,000, we now have put them in a position where they're going to make, for 3 years or 5 years, depending on where they fit, anywhere between 160 or 180,000. Their pension benefits are based on that number. This is another, what I call shadow pay for play. I'll give you another shadow pay for play. You can be appointed to work directly in some of these agencies because of your campaigns. You could be, the opportunities for state contracts because of some of your campaign contributions. But the appointments are the shadow pay for play, or those are the ones where too often, members, and by the way, it affects every one of us. The most glaring example that I can give you is Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. Congresswoman Joyce Beatty was in the House for many, many years, State House. She did a lot for many, many universities, including Ohio State. She took a job, she left the state offices, and this story is public, so it's not like Jim Renacci is coming up with something that it's not a public, it was brought up many, many years ago. She left the state employ, and she took a job with Ohio State, making almost 4 times what she was making in the State House. She then retired, and she got 80-some% of the higher level. That comes out of our pockets. That's a taxpayer's, that is a pay for play. Think about it. We're all going to pay for that. That is now a pension plan. Now, I give credit to Congresswoman Beatty. She then turned around and ran for Congress. She's now one of your US Congress people in Ohio. Guess what? She's going to get another pension coming out of Congress. Think about what we are doing when it comes to pensions. We can accelerate the numbers, and it becomes one of the biggest shadow pay for plays that nobody ever talks about. How do we fix this? Transparency, transparency, transparency. One of the things I didn't put on here too is term limits. Term limits. It's something that the state, I know this, people will tell you the state of Ohio has term limits. They really don't. There are members of the state General Assembly who have been around for 30 plus years. They just go from the House to the Senate, to the House, to the Senate, to the House, to the Senate. And we keep electing them. And in the end, we keep electing them and they keep building up a pension. That's the shadow pay for play. We need to change term limits in Ohio so that people are termed out after so many years. You can serve in the House, the Senate, in a statewide office, but only for so many years. And people say, well, that's not fair. Well, yeah, sure it is, because you can always go back and serve in the county offices if you want to stay in public service. You can go to the federal government. And so, by the way, we need term limits there too. But why should the state be burdened with a pay for play shadow pension plan when, if you really want to be in public service for your life, career politicians, as I call them, by the way, the biggest problem with career politicians is they've never really lived in the real world. They're only looking for the next election, the next opportunity, the next way of making sure their pension plans are, are solid. Too often, we continue to keep electing these career politicians. And what we really should be doing is making sure that we're looking at their background experience, what they've done, and especially since this is a pay for play discussion tonight, have they been involved in pay for play? If they have been involved in pay for play, we need to ask them to answer some of the questions. What are the reasons why you were involved in the pay for play issue? How did it transpire? What were the benefits? But until we set limits where we say, look, if you donate $5,000, and by the way, it could be less than that. I'm just picking an arbitrary number. That's why I want to always make sure we have solutions. The solution is if you donate $5,000 to the state, any statewide official, you can't get a statewide contract if you donate more than 5,000. Wouldn't that stop the pay for play? You're darn right it would. If you reported your ownership in any company and your ownership was 5% or more and you donated more than $5,000, your company could not get a contract with the state of Ohio. If you start using just simple things like this, we can change the corruption and pay for play. Now, last but not least, we should increase the penalties for criminal convictions of public sector fraud. I mean, look, if you're going to get involved in pay for play and you get caught, you should be, the criminal convictions, the penalties should be much higher because you're being a trusted person with the dollars that the state is, that the state taxpayers are spending to run our state. With that, and I know there have been a lot of people putting up some questions, I'd love to answer some questions, also hear from you, hear what some of your thoughts are, and see if together we can continue to come up with ways to change Ohio. Because right now, Ohio is clearly going in the wrong direction, and pay for play, corruption, 7th most corrupt state in the country. These are problems that many of us aren't aware of, but we have to change. With that, Tom, let's take some questions.
Yeah, great. We do have a good lineup of questions already in the queue here. We're going to start off first with Tara Bowler. Please unmute and ask your question.
Hey, Tara, are you there? You got to unmute. There you go.
Thank you. I had to find the unmute button. Thank you for taking my question. Mike DeWine has faced some serious pay-to-play issues, especially when he was the Attorney General. How come all this stuff keeps getting swept under the rug and a politician like Mike DeWine keeps getting elected?
Tara, good question. You can go back year after year after year and find many, many issues with Attorney General DeWine that have been publicized. You can find many issues currently with House Bill 6, with First Energy funding. It's interesting if you look at who the largest donors to Governor DeWine's campaign were. The largest donor was Ohio Republican Party. The second largest donor was the Summit County Republican Party. The third largest donor was First Energy. First Energy was also one of the largest donors to the Ohio Republican Party. It was also one of the largest donors to the Summit County Republican Party. Maybe not the company, but individuals. And then, if you look at the generation now that helped Governor DeWine's daughter, that was also coming from First Energy indirectly. So I think in the end, these are the kind of things that just have to be looked at, that questions have to be asked. But the answer to you, Tara, is really, he keeps getting enough votes to get elected. And it's that simple. People have to be able to make the decision that enough's enough and pay for play has to stop, and we're going to change it. And I think that if we do that, we're going to have to ask the tough questions, and then we're going to have to make the tough decisions when it comes to the voting.
Thanks for the question, Tara. Up next, Samantha. Looks like she's unmuted. Go ahead, Samantha.
Samantha, you're on. You're up.
It would help if I also hit the unmute button. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. I actually have two quick questions. Number one, how do these people get these huge sweetheart pensions, and how are they calculated? And number two, didn't John Husted's campaign finance show he donated millions to the DeWine campaign to then become lieutenant governor?
Huh. Samantha, that's an interesting question. I never thought about that. But yeah, I mean, clearly there was a deal cut between, at that time, candidate DeWine and candidate Husted, where candidate Husted gave his $4 million to candidate DeWine to become the lieutenant governor. You know what? I honestly never thought about that, but there's another perfect example of where money is used to play, and it was used in that situation. How do the pensions, the pension calculation, which is your other question, it's very interesting. And again, I don't think many people realize it. By the way, our pensions are unfunded in the state. They are underfunded. There's not enough money in it. And you can imagine if you've been with the state, think about this. Let's take an example. I told you there are some House members and Senate members who have been around for 30 years. Well, you've been around for 30 years and you're getting 65, 70,000, 60,000, whatever the number is over those 30 years. If there is a pension plan, normally it would be, we're going to give you 80% of 60,000. And that's what they used to be your three highest years. Well, if you were in the House and the Senate and you made 60,000, again, I'm using round numbers. Somebody may say to me, you know, Renacci, it's 65,000 and, you know, you only get 82% or whatever, but the numbers are the numbers. If it's 60,000 and you're there for 30 years, and then all of a sudden you get an appointment to a cabinet position, or you get an appointment to a position at, you get hired by one of the universities, by the way, who takes state money. So you're working with all these universities, and all of a sudden the university hires you. And let's assume they hire you as president. So now you made $60,000 a year for 30 years, and you make $300,000 a year as president for 3 years. Just think about what just happened there. The taxpayers' pension plan will be, going forward, if you retire after those 3 years, especially now that you're grandfathered in, you're going to get somewhere around 80% of 300,000 funded by the state of Ohio, funded by taxpayers, even though your average salary over 33 years was nowhere near 300,000. Now, again, they have changed it to 5 years, and they've changed that going forward. They grandfathered people in from the past. But still, now what you do is you take a job for 5 years. And after 5 years, you get some 80%. So you wonder why the pension plans are underfunded. You wonder why we call this a shadow pay for play. Because quite frankly, you might have been working with that university. You might have been helping that university as a state rep or a state senator, and that university is now hiring you. The burden ends up on the taxpayers, and that's the sad thing. All of this burden always ends up back on the taxpayers. Thank you for your questions. I really never thought about the John Husted, Mike DeWine transfer of $4 million, but it's pretty interesting. That could also be considered, you know, if Lieutenant Governor Husted didn't think he could win that election, it's kind of an interesting thing. And again, now that you've said that, if he didn't think he could win that election, what better way to guarantee himself, you know, a future job and a future pension? By the way, he would also be one that now gets a pay. I think his current pay is about $180,000 a year. Prior to that, I'm not sure what it was. And prior to that, he was in the Senate and he was in the House. His pension plan is just continuing to blossom because he now is getting $180,000 a year. He would take the last average of the last 3 years. It was probably a good, for him, it was a good business transaction because what he did is if he thought he was going to lose the governor's race, he was able to parlay that into a lieutenant governor's seat, and now probably an extra 30 or 40,000 a year on his pension plan. It's interesting you brought that up. I never thought about it.
Yeah, real good question. We're going to move on to Bonnie Kaufman. Bonnie, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Bonnie, you have to unmute. Bonnie is still muted.
Yep, still muted. Let's come back to Bonnie. We'll move down to Nancy Carpenter. If we get her queued up. Nancy, go ahead.
Nancy.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you for taking my question. Mr. Renacci, you took a lot of money from First Energy when you were in Congress, and you were on the record supporting House Bill 6. So I'm just wondering, is that why you are calling members of the General Assembly and not asking them to not expel Larry Householder?
Well, Nancy, first off, I do support House Bill 6. I still support House Bill 6. I'm not going to run away from that vote. I'm not sure I support the transfer of money around. House Bill 6 was actually a good bill. I wrote an op-ed about it, supporting it. Look, it's about jobs in Ohio, which was very positive. And it's also was about lower energy costs in Ohio. So if you look at the actual bill, there were a lot of conservatives that supported House Bill 6. And I wrote an op-ed supporting it. So I absolutely agree that House Bill 6 was a good bill. Now, the way money was funneled through Generations, whatever that organization was, that wasn't right. I do think that it needs to be investigated. I'm not sure anything was criminally wrong, but I am glad to see that the investigation is going forward. I do know that a number of the individuals have pleaded guilty, and I do know that the organization has pled guilty as well. So, but I'm also a believer in due process. I think we should have due process, and I think in the end, but those that are convicted should be convicted to the full extent of the law. But thank you for your question, Nancy.
Great. We're going to move on to Dick Edwards. Get him queued up here. Looks like Bonnie dropped off, so we're going to move on to Dick Edwards for his question tonight.
Hey, Jim, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Dick.
Hey, Jim, thanks for all you do and thanks for your time tonight. I agree with you in pay to play. So my question for you here tonight is, you and your buddy Ben Suarez, during your 40 calls with him back in 2012, he then gave you $100,000 and you sent a letter to Governor Kasich complaining about investigation into him. So I was just curious about how that works with your battle against corruption here.
Sure, absolutely, Dick. Thank you for that question. Ben Suarez and his company donated $100,000 to my campaign. It came through various individuals to a treasurer in my campaign. What she did is she saw the check, it met all the standards. She, again, remember, when it comes to donations, I know people want to point fingers and stuff like that, and this is a great question. So I have a treasurer, a CPA. She has to look at every donation that comes in. She has to make sure that it does not exceed certain levels. She has to make sure that all the disclosures are there, and then she deposits in the campaign account. That's what occurred. Then all of a sudden, there was an issue with Ben Suarez, which actually started with, at that time, Josh Mandel, not Jim Renacci. But Jim Renacci, then they questioned why a donor in my district had given me $100,000 in various checks. As soon as that occurred, I returned all the money. So again, I think that's the best answer anybody can give. If you receive money and then you find out there's potential problems with it, we returned it all back. We didn't even question it. So there's always going to be instances where you get money. But Ben Suarez, what was interesting about that, and I appreciate that, he asked me to do something, and I told him, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this did go to court. He asked me to do something, and I said, not only could not do, it was a state issue, and I sent the letter down to Governor Kasich and said, here's an issue with an Ohio taxpayer, an Ohio company that you need to look at. I don't know. I think that's a pretty good answer and a pretty simple way to really handle that. But thank you for your question.
Thanks for that one, Dick. We're going to move on to Brian Ames. Brian, please unmute. You're up next.
What I have seen is a lack of participation in our county government and our county parties due to a certain misunderstanding of what they are. For example, now like in Geauga County, there are like 70 members of the Geauga Republican Central Committee. There are 25,000 Republicans registered in Geauga County. Now they have a lot of controversy going on up there. And I'm sure that if a larger part of those 25,000 were able to get involved in that, they would clear up a lot of that trouble. And I see that as being critical into accomplishing what you want to do. So my question is, how do we?
Brian, are you there?
Yeah, Tom, I didn't hear the question.
I think we lost him just before the question. I don't know if you can comment on any of that on a county level.
Well,
I'm not sure we got to the punchline on that one.
I apologize, I didn't hear your question, but I will tell you, you know how we fix things? We all get involved. And we start to support policies and principles of the Republican Party. Look, I was currently asked to run the Medina County Republican Party. And I'm doing that, but I continue to say it's not about the person, it's about the policy, it's about the principle, and it's about getting people involved. So what we're doing in Medina County is we're filling all the precincts. We are educating our central committee precinct leaders. We're doing events to make sure they understand what their goals and jobs are. And then we're showcasing candidates. We're talking about principles and policies. And if a candidate's principles or policies are not Republican, the Medina County Republican Party has censored, certain votes. We censored, for instance, Anthony Gonzalez's vote on the impeachment because the policy committee of Medina County did not think that Anthony's vote, remember his vote, not him, his vote was proper. And so I think that's the way to do it. The more people get involved, the better we are. And again, we can continue to build a party from the base up, not from the top down.
Hope that kind of cleared up your question there, Brian. Again, if you guys do have any questions tonight, click the raise your hand icon on your Zoom call tonight. We only have a couple more people queued up. Up next, with Jim, we have Jack Windsor.
Hi, Jim. Thank you for this town hall. Thank you for taking my question tonight. You've talked about pay to play and House Bill 6. So on the eve of the Ohio Republican Party's election to pick the next chair of the state party, the establishment's heir apparent seems to be Bob Paduchek, who's running against former state rep John Becker. Now, yesterday, Paduchek received the Trump endorsement for the spot. Bob was a proponent of House Bill 6 and lobbied Ohio lawmakers to support the bailout. Do you think that will hurt his chances of winning the chair tomorrow, or do you think he's a shoo-in?
Well, Jack, it's a good question. I will tell you this, that I supported House Bill 6, so I'm going to repeat that again. I do believe the principles of the bill were good. I do not support the funding and the way that it occurred. And interesting enough, there is somewhat of a taint on anyone in the legislature who supported the bill, although there's some very good legislators who supported the bill. I mean, Bob Paduchek's running against John Becker in the race, and John Becker supported House Bill 6 because the principles of House Bill 6 were good. I'm not sure that the process and the way money was funneled was good. And I do think that will at least should be asked. Look, whoever's running for the ORP chairman, we do have to make sure that our party comes together, and there should be, the House Bill 6 question should be brought up for both candidates as to, you were lobbying for it. Were you being paid? I mean, that's probably the bigger question. Were you being paid by First Energy, or did you just vote on it because it was a good bill? I wrote a op-ed and I didn't receive any compensation from First Energy. I did it as a citizen who believed in the bill. I think those are the kind of questions to be asked. If you receive money from any one of the organizations and you're running for chairman, which I'm not sure either of them did, but I think that's something that probably should be disclosed, and then the decision will have to be made by the people that are voting, which is the Central Committee.
Great, thanks for that question. We had Sue Ellen in the queue there. That would have been there she is. Sue Ellen King will be next tonight for you, Jim.
Go ahead, Sue Ellen.
I got a couple things. That House Bill 6, I did vote for it too. And then all this stuff with the corruption, I was like, the company was going bankrupt. How did all this stuff, where did this corruption come in? So then I read one place that originally the company, there was a time where it takes energy, a different form of energy, to make nuclear energy. I think it might be gas, natural gas. But at some point, all of a sudden, those prices to make energy at the nuclear plants went sky high and they weren't planning for it. And I think also maybe because their technology is old, it created another problem. And that's how they actually got into a bankruptcy situation. So they had issues because the energy that actually they needed to create their energy nuclear went out of control price wise. So that started the snowball. But then, yes, the snowball got kind of dirty after that. I have a question though for Mr. Renacci. I hear sometimes voters will say to their candidate, they'll say, you know, why couldn't you do such and such? And then this response comes back, you don't know how much pressure there is in the Congress or the House or the this or the that. And I believe that you tell us the truth. And when you were actually in Washington, did you actually have people that put death threats on you and did all that kind of stuff when you came up with cutting funding, et cetera? Or is this a bigger, I don't know, a bigger deal than I mean, do I think it's a bigger deal than it is, or do you really do get death threats and all this kind of stuff?
Well, thank you, Sue, for your question. First off, I want to start with House Bill 6 again. One of the problems with the nuclear plants that people weren't aware of is when everything was deregulated, everybody thought, well, the nuclear plants are going to have the opportunity to charge what they want. One of the biggest issues was that then the federal government came in and put a ceiling on how much the nuclear power plants could charge. So you're exactly right. While their costs were going through the roof, their revenues were locked, which is why government intervention shouldn't be allowed anyway. And because their costs, what they could charge was locked, then they couldn't pay their bills, and that's the reason they went into bankruptcy. So if you really look at what happened with not First Energy, but the nuclear power plants, it was another place where government intervention got involved. Now, on to your next question. Look, in Washington, you always get pressure from groups and from supporters. And I use this example many, many times. I still remember there was a bill in Washington where we were going to cap how much a credit card company could charge. And if you think about it, there are multiple credit cards. You got MasterCard, you got Visa, so it's not like it's a monopoly. And everybody has to pay a charge for using the credit card. So when I was in Washington, I got a lot of donations from businesses because they supported a pro-business candidate like me. And I'll never forget the pressure I got because I received a donation from Lowe's and Walmart and Home Depot. Not a big donation, whatever the maximum amount was, a couple $1,000s each. But because I did not vote with them, they wanted the credit card fees to be reduced. Because I did not vote with all three of those entities, I got phone calls and they said to me, you realize I donated to you? And I go, well, I realize you donated to me, but I will also tell you this, MasterCard, Visa, American Express, all those companies, those are businesses, and the government shouldn't be telling them how much they should charge, just like we shouldn't be telling you how much you should charge. We shouldn't be telling you how much you should charge for a hammer. We shouldn't charge, and they were not happy. But in the end, there's the perfect example of doing what's right, even though you get a contribution. I mean, they didn't donate to me the next cycle, and then the cycle after that, they came back because they saw that 90% of the time I was always going to vote to the benefit of business. Now, when it comes to death threats, absolutely. Remember, I was in Congress when the Arizona congressman was shot, and we had many threats. In fact, we were doing not teletown halls, we were doing actual town halls I'll never forget. I was doing a town hall at Walsh University, and literally I could have canceled it. It was 3 days after that shooting, but instead, we contacted the police. By the way, I support all of our first responders. I was a firefighter. Um, these guys put their life on the line, but I remember having police officers all around me. I also remember in many, many town halls, one in Strongsville, where there were literally threats that they had SWAT teams around the building. I still went there and spoke. Um, but yes, it is something that has gotten out of hand. You shouldn't have a death threat. You shouldn't be called the names you're called. But in the end, it's a privilege to serve, but it's even a better privilege to get something done. My biggest concern in Washington is we're not getting anything done now. But thank you for your question. Hopefully I answered it.
All right, we have two more questions. One from Max Vessels, and then Jack Windsor has another question to wrap things up tonight. So two more questions tonight, Jim. Max, go ahead.
Hey, Jim, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Max.
Hey, so, I really like what you're saying as it relates to transparency. And I'm someone who's been getting involved recently, and I like to make sure that my donations go to the right candidates. So I'm just kind of curious why you didn't actually spend the money you loaned your campaign during your last race. Did you not think you could win?
Well, Max, that's kind of an interesting question. And I love the try and get you questions. Quite frankly, I spent $4.2 million. I spent over $1 million of my own money. And what's interesting is that kind of question, Max. I wish you were running for election. I want to see you spend your money. But I spent and raised everything I got. I spent more than I was able to raise, including a chunk of my money. So interesting questions from interesting people. But, and look, Max must not be a real person, Tom. He must be a, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. But like I said, I don't think Max or whoever asked that question really looks at the numbers to see that not only did Jim Renacci spend all the money that he raised, he also spent about $1.5 million of his own money.
And Jack Windsor was going to chime in here for the last question, and then we'll wrap things up. Jack, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Tom, and thanks again, Jim. I think it was the last town hall you mentioned at the end that you do whatever it takes to help Ohio. Since that time, U.S. Senator Rob Portman has announced that he's not going to seek re-election in 2022, and Jane Timken and Josh Mandel have thrown their hats in the ring. Your name has been thrown around for the governor's chair. And now with that U.S. Senate seat open, your name has surfaced a couple of times as well. So to put you on the spot, I know that your heart is for helping the state of Ohio. Has that U.S. Senate opportunity shown up on your radar? And do you have any inkling of whether you will be in Washington, D.C. or hope to be in Columbus in 2022?
Well, Jack, thanks for the question. Look, I have three options. One option is to continue to do what I'm doing from the outside. And then there's two options now of going into the inside. One, of course, is potentially running statewide. The other one is running for the Senate seat. I announced about 3 weeks ago that I'm going to do a deep dive into the state, which I've been doing. I said that I'm going to call people, ask them their thoughts, ask them their questions, ask them what they think. What I have found is that I'm through about 50% of my calls. People are really disappointed with Ohio. Republicans, by the way, that I'm calling. They're really disappointed with the direction of Ohio. Some of them have said to me, we'd love to have you run statewide in Ohio. Some have said, we'd love to have you run for the Senate seat. Remember, Sherrod Brown spent $33.5 million. I spent $4.2 million. Only lost that race by 150,000 net votes. Kind of interesting because Governor DeWine, I've said this before, this is money in politics. Governor DeWine spent 35 million. Cordray spent 14 or 15 million. Governor DeWine only won by a net 82,000 votes. So those elections were pretty close. By the way, another statistic for the listeners, because people say, well, you lost to Sherrod Brown. If you look, Sherrod Brown actually beat everybody. Look at the numbers. He beat everybody who ran statewide. He would have been governor if he ran for governor. He would have been auditor if he ran for auditor. He would have been whatever he wanted to be because he got the most votes in the state. So what I'm trying to say is I did pretty good. I got some name ID out there. I have done some deep dives into the state to find out that I'm one of the 4 or 5 people that has over 50% name ID, which is a real key to winning statewide. You know, Jack, somebody used to tell me that you had to run statewide once and lose before you could ever win. Governor Voinovich actually ran the first time statewide and lost by 14 percentage points. First time I ran statewide, I lost by 6. Josh Mandel ran 6 years earlier, spent almost 50 million in his race against Sherrod Brown, lost by 6. So when I start to look at those numbers, I do have this statewide name ID. I think it's very important, but I'm gonna spend the next 30 days calling the rest of that percentage of Republicans throughout the state and asking them what they think, where they think I could better serve and where they think I could better help Ohio, because that's the real key. Look, the title senator and the title governor is not as important to me as the title of father, the title of grandfather now, but also the title of a guy who is successful in getting things accomplished. And I know I can do that in any position I run for. So I'm gonna be talking to people, and we're gonna continue to do this though, because I've not given up on Ohio. Look, I started in 2019 talking about the issues in Ohio. We have opened up the eyes of a lot of people. People are starting to see that Ohio's the 6th most left state. Ohio spends too much. Ohio taxes too much. They're seeing all this, and they're starting to realize that we do have issues in Ohio that we have to fix. Can't fix them from Washington. Washington has a whole bunch of other problems. And by the way, Washington is so broken now. I've said this, I'm not sure if it could be fixed, but if I believe I can help people live the American dream here in Ohio, like I was able to do, and I can do it in a Senate seat, I might consider that. But I'll tell you, it's going to be finding the right place to do the right thing. So 3 choices, that answer will come in the next few weeks or few months. But we're going to continue to do what we're doing to make sure we move Ohio forward. I think that's it for tonight. We're going to wrap up. Look, we need your support. We're going to continue to grow the organization. If you want to become a Renacci County captain, go to jimrenacci.com/join. You can catch us on social media. We are always promoting issues with Ohio. Facebook.com//Jim Renacci or Twitter.com/Jim Renacci. Please join the team. Please join the movement. And let's really move to make Ohio first. Thank you all for being in the town hall tonight.